My name is Anmol Agrawal, and I'll be your host for this incredible journey into the world of Jira customization. This workshop is all about empowering you, the talented developers and partners, to take your Jira experience to the next level. We know that Jira is already a powerful tool for project management, but with Forge, we can unlock a whole new level of customization and tailor it to your specific needs. Throughout this event, we'll guide you through the ins and outs of Forge. You'll gain a deeper understanding of how to build custom apps, extend Jira capabilities, and ultimately make it work exactly the way you want it to. We have carefully curated this workshop to ensure that whether you are a seasoned developer or a new to the world of Jira customization, you will find valuable takeaways. So without further ado, let's dive headfirst into the world of customizing Jira with Forge. Let's start off with introduction to our developer platform, Forge. Atlassian Forge is a serverless app development platform specifically designed to empower developers like you to build secure, reliable, and scalable apps. Now, what exactly does that mean? Let's break it down. First and foremost, Forge is serverless. Gone are the days of managing infrastructure, provisioning servers, and worrying about scaling your apps. With Forge, you can focus solely on writing code and building amazing functionalities for Jira. The serverless nature of Forge ensures that you can effortlessly deploy your apps without the hassle of maintaining infrastructure, leaving you more time and energy to innovate. Now, let's talk about security. When you build apps with Forge, you can rest assured that you are leveraging a platform that adheres to best practices in security. Atlassian provides robust security measures, including managed authentication, isolation of cloud instances, and transparency about capabilities of your app. So you can build apps with confidence and protect your users' data. Lastly, Forge gives you all the ways of customizing your app. Want to change the UI, create automations, or store data the way you like? We got you covered. As a result, Forge lets you focus more on innovation part of your apps that makes you unique and worry less about the infrastructure aspect. Next, let's take a deeper dive into Forge and try to understand different aspects of this platform using a code example. Before we start, please make sure you have everything set up. Firstly, make sure you have Forge installed. You can use forge --version command to make sure of that. If you haven't already, please clone this Git repo. It has hands-on exercises and resources that will work within this session. If Forge is not set up in your system, please visit go.atlassian.com/forge-getting-started, where you will find the directions to do that. Lastly, please have a Jira software project set up in your cloud instance because our code samples are focused towards it. To start off, we are going to create a Hello World app. In my setup, I have created a folder, Dev Day 2023, and inside that, I have cloned the repo. We'll stay in this root directory in the terminal, and please follow the commands that I type here. We'll go into the DD23 Forge Jira folder later on when we get into the hands-on exercises. Right now, we'll create a Hello World app here. So in the terminal, type Forge create. This lets you create an app in the current directory. The first thing it asks you is to provide an app name. Let's give it a name, hello-world. Next, it provides you an option to select the template. These templates are a great starting point if you already know what you're trying to achieve. Say, if you're trying to customize UI, you can get started with Customize UI template. For now, let's go into Show All, and from these numerous templates, we'll select Jira Issue Panel Kit. Jira Issue Panel UI Kit. I'll wait here for a few seconds to make sure everyone got this exact template. Once you got this, click Enter. What this will do is a bunch of steps. It downloads a template, registers your app in the cloud, create multiple environments of your app, and install the necessary libraries. We'll shortly get into the structure of the project. For now, let's try to deploy this app and see it working. We'll go into the folder Hello World and type the command force deploy. When we do it, a number of things happen. Forge links your code and validates file to make sure they are error-free. It packages all the files and deploys the app to the development environment in the cloud. Now the app is deployed, we'll install it in a site to test out our app. To do this, type forge install in the terminal. It first asks you to provide the product our app uses. In this case, let's select Jira. Next is ask for the site URL where we want to install. So I have my instance opened up here, and the URL that you see here is the one that we want to use. In this case, unmol2.atlassian.net. Then it lists out the scopes that our app uses. We'll get onto this later on. For now, let's just continue. And we can see the success message that your app in the development environment is now installed in the Jira instance. So let's check it out. Once we refresh our instance, and let's open up one of our issues. For a second, I'll just turn this into a full screen. And here you can see a button called Hello-World. Once you click it, it creates this issue panel at the top of the activity, which has the message Hello World. We just saw Hello World app in action. Let's try to understand all the elements that make up this app. First is force CLI. It's the command line interface that lets you build and deploy the app. You have already interacted with it when you used forge create and forge deploy command. But CLI packs a lot more power. You can find those options by simply typing forge in your terminal. You can learn more about CLI at go.atlassian.com/forge-CLI. Next is modules. Modules let you describe how your app extends and interacts with Atlassian products. In the Hello World app, we made use of one of those modules. Jira Issue Panel module. It adds an issue panel to a Jira issue when a configured button is clicked. The content of the module is shown above the activity panel on a Jira issue. Another module is Jira project page. It adds an item in the Apps section on the left navigation of Jira project settings in the sidebar. When the item is clicked, content is rendered on a new Jira page. Those were a couple of examples of modules. Every module comes with its own set of UI locations and behaviors. You can learn more about all the provided Jira modules at go.atlassian.com/forge-jira-modules. Next concept is permissions. Whenever your app wants to access remote data or resources, you will have to give your app the permission to do so. This aspect makes your app more secure. There are a couple of types of permissions. Let's look at it one by one. First is product scopes. When you want your app to make authenticated API calls, for example, get issue API call, you will have to add the permission in your app to be able to do that. You can find those permissions in the API docs as shown here and use that within the manifest file in your app as shown in the above screenshot. We'll get into what is manifest file shortly. Next is content permissions. Forge provides an additional layer of protection to your app from cross-site scripting and other code injection attacks using content permissions. And these are required when you decide to use our custom UI kit to modify the UI of your app. If you want to bring your own resources, say style sheets, into the app, you can do so using something called external permissions. You can go in depth about all these permissions at go.atlassian.com/forge-permissions. Once again, all these links are mentioned in the README file of the repo that you cloned at the beginning of this session. We have briefly mentioned manifest before. It's a YAML file which describes the structure of your app. We talked about modules and permissions before. All those are defined here. It looks something like this. You can see the modules definition, permissions, and other information like app ID. Forge also comes with a feature called tunneling that runs your app code locally on your machine via the Forge CLI. This is similar to live reload, where your whole app is refreshed when you make any changes to a file except manifest file. If the manifest file is updated, you will have to deploy your app and tunnel again. Let's see it in action. So here we have the Hello World app, and in the terminal, we are going to type Forge tunnel. And please make sure for the Forge to work, you have Docker installed in your system. It will set up an environment, it will create a container and set up the environment where your Forge app is running. And then it connects to the instance where the app is installed. Meanwhile, if we open up the Hello World app and inside the source folder, we have the index.jsx file. You can see there's a text called Hello World, which is getting rendered here. Let's try to update that, and then we'll see how the tunnel reloads it, how the tunneling works. So instead of Hello World, let's just update it to Hello from another world. Once we save the file, then it reloads the code, run the same functions like Forge linting, bundling the code. And then our app is automatically updated in our instance. Once we refresh it and go through the same process, yes, now we can see hello from another world. So while the Forge tunnel was running, we updated some code and we saw the change live. This comes in very handy during development and debugging process. Another cool feature that Forge has is that when we did Forge create, it also created development, staging, and production environment to deploy your apps. And the way you do it is by using -E while using Forge deploy and Forge install command. The way you can differentiate between these versions of apps is when your app is deployed to development, your app title will have the suffix development. Similarly, while your app is deployed to staging, it will have the suffix staging. Once you deploy your app to production, your app title will no longer have any suffix. Let me show you in action what I mean by this. When we go into the apps section in your instance and select manage your apps, here you see the Hello World app that we just deployed, and it has a suffix of development. That means this app is deployed in the development environment. One of the most common coding practices is to use environment variables. It is used to store app secrets, API keys, and configuration data, which are retrieved by your running app when needed. It's possible to manage your environment variables using Forge CLI for different environments. Although we won't see this in demo, the command to work with them is Forge variables. You not only get the ability to manage variables, but also to encrypt them by simply passing an option called encrypt. To learn more about environments and environment variables, check out go.atlassian.com/forge-environments. That covers up the fundamentals of Forge. We learned about how to extend UI using modules, add API calls with permissions, looked at manifest file, deployed the app in development environment, and learned about environment variables. That was a lot. Congratulations. You now have the foundational knowledge and the power to build your own Forge app. That was a lot of theory. Let's try to practice what we have learned so far using hands-on exercises. In this first exercise, we are going to customize UI in Jira. Before we jump into code, I'll briefly explain two ways in which you can customize a UI. First is UI Kit. It's a library of components that we provide to help you build your app. Each component is described using declarative markup language like button, form, text, etc. Also, these components follow Atlassian design guidelines right out of the box. If you guys have worked with React.js, these components will look familiar as they are very similar to React components. Another way of customizing is via custom UI. These apps run within an iframe. This provides a secure and isolated hosting environment for custom-built UI. You can bring in your own resources like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Forge gives you an option to host your static resources. In this exercise, we are going to work with UI Kit. We'll stop the tunneling and we will go back to the main directory. From there, we'll go into the DD23 Forge Jira directory. And there are a couple of steps that there are a couple of commands that will run in the terminal first, and I'll explain what's happening. The first command is npm install Jira @forge-ui and @forge API. These are the two libraries that our work examples are going to use. So let's run the command. Once the necessary packages are installed, the next command that we are going to do is do forge register. I'll expand the DD23 for Jira folder, and inside that we have two folders called solutions and workshop. So workshop is the one that we want to get into first, and there we'll work with all the exercises. And the solutions folder had all the solutions of the challenges that will come across. So let's just go into the workshop folder. And then, because we ran the npm install in the wrong directory, apologies for that. So let's run that command again. And then run forge register. And what this will do is give the new app ID to our Forge app. So let's give it a few details that it asks for. So let's give this the name to this app as workshop. Now it's going to register the app. And also it created the multiple environments for this app that we talked about earlier. Next, what we are going to do is Forge deploy. This will deploy our app to the cloud. Once this is deployed, then we are going to run forge install, and we are going to install our workshop app into our instance. So again, let's select Jira as our product where we want to run our app. Let's enter the site URL. And in this app source code, there are a couple of extra scopes that we have introduced that we are going that the app will be using, and that's what it's listing out. So let's continue with yes, and it's going to install the app in our instance. Meanwhile, let's go into the project. Also, I have created a couple of sample issues here. You can go ahead and create a few of the issues because hands-on exercises is going to make use of that. All right, cool. It took a while, but it got installed. So let's keep moving on. And if we refresh our app, if we refresh our instance on the sidebar, there should be a new option called Dev Day 23 demos. So we'll click on that. And in the first time, you should see something like allow access window. Because we have introduced some new scopes that we just see here, we want to grant access. So what the app is doing is it's asking for access from the users to make use of these permissions. So for the first time, let's allow access. You will see a consent screen. So we have this app and it's talking to our Jira instance. Here are a couple of permissions that our app is asking for, and for this particular site. So let's go ahead and accept and granted permissions. and you should see your app rendering successfully in this way. So next, what we'll do is inside the workshop folder, we have the source folder, SRC, and we are going to open the UI and storage.jsx. So in this file, let's try to understand the concepts of the Forge UI. So first concept is something called components. Component is an element that describes a part of your app's interface, like text, heading, a table. So these are all components. In this file, the next concept that we have is something called hooks. Hooks are special functions that enable you to update and use the state of your app. The state is a value that the component remembers and can be updated. So use state, this hook adds and updates local state to a component. Another hook that we have here is called use product context. This hook reads the context about product and cloud instance in which the component is currently running. And the last concept that we have is called event handler. Event handler are the functions that describe what to do when the user interacts with them. So here we have an example. We have a form component, and in that it comes with a handler called onSubmit. And this is triggered when the form is submitted. So let's try to understand what's happening here. We have under this issue list, we are rendering some of the issues that we already have. We are rendering their key and summary. If we jump into the code example, so here we have the issues that's getting rendered, but you might be wondering, where are these issues coming from? And the issues are coming from the using the use state hook. We are calling a method called get issues. If you scroll down at the bottom of this file, we have provided a couple of helpers for you. One is the get issue, which is to get one individual issue. Another one is get issues, which is to get all the issues. So we are making use of the get issues method. So once we get all these issues and it's stored in the issues constant, that's what after that we are looping through it and rendering created a new component called issue, which looks like the text, which has two texts, one for the key and one for the summary. And we pass on the data issue key and summary after the API call is made, and that's getting rendered here. But this is pretty static. Let's try to make it more dynamic. So here's the challenge. You can see it written under challenge 1. The task is we have created this form. It currently doesn't have any value. So we want to populate it with the issue keys. And when you select any issue key from this select field and submit it, below that, it should bring the details of the issue key and the issue summary. In this, you can uncomment these 3 lines. And inside this, you have to add an option UI element, which will have those issue keys. Underneath the task, you can see there's the link to our API documentation from where you can see the definition of how to define the option UI. And there's one more task in this challenge. In the get issue command, which will be triggered once we select an issue from the select field and submit it. This get issue command will be triggered. So currently it doesn't have the API to make the call to get the issue. So the second task of this challenge is to populate this with the issue API. Same as before, just below the task, you can see inside the hint, the link from the documentation on about the get issue API. All right, let's see how to solve these challenges. For the first one, where we have to populate a select field with the issue key, the command looks something like this. So there's an element called option, which has properties, label, and value. And in this case, we have passed on the issue key as the value. And for the second task of this challenge, the API is REST API 3 issue. And the issue key that we get from the drop down here will be passed on inside this method. Let's try to refresh our app and see if it works. I forgot the another step, which is called force tunnel, because currently our app is not directly talking to our local app. So let's run force tunnel. All right, let's refresh our app again in our instance. And you should see your select field populated with the issue keys. If we select one of the issues and submit the form, you will see select the key and the summary of the selected issues. And on the here, you will see the logs from the helpers that we provided. So here's the get issues data, which is the log for all the issues. And the one is the get issue data. So in this case, we selected DV-24 issue, and you see the logs here for that. Let's try that again with another issue key. Let's just submit that again. And it works. Now you know how to work with UI. Next up, let's learn how to create automations in your app. This can be achieved by something called triggers. There are 3 types of triggers in Forge, and I'll briefly explain them first before jumping into the code. First is product trigger. Say you have updated an issue and would like something to happen when that event happens. Product trigger takes care of that where a function is invoked when the product event is fired. and you can define it in the manifest as shown in the screenshot. To learn more about what product events exist in Jira, you can visit go.atlassian.com/Jira-events. Another type of trigger is scheduled trigger. This is similar to cron job, using which you can repeatedly invoke a function at specific intervals. Lastly, we have web trigger. This lets you create an URL in your app, which will invoke a function when an HTTP request is made to that URL. Now let's jump into the hands-on exercise. In this exercise, we'll work with product triggers. In your instance, we'll go into the board and hopefully you have created a couple of issues. And in the code, we'll jump into product inside the source folder, product-trigger.jsx. I'll clear up the log, and what I would like you to do is to create an issue. So let's just create, say, sample issue. And when you create a sample issue, you will see there's a new log here, a couple of new logs here. First is hello world from Jira product trigger. Another one is event. And the third one is context. Let's try to understand where it's coming from. So here, actually before jumping into this, let's take a look at the manifest file. Here we have a trigger module defined. And for this case, we have defined Jira trigger issue created. And this looks for any events which is related to issue creation inside the Jira. And when it notices that event, then it tries to invoke a function called product trigger issue. And this corresponds to the function mentioned here. And this function is handled by run method inside the product trigger file. So let's look at the product trigger file. And here you can see the run event. Inside the run event, you can see a couple of logs. One is a simple log for the hello world from Jira product trigger. You have access to a couple of parameters inside this. One is event, and the one is context. To look into what data do we get inside each of those, I have logged it here. So in this case, since we looked for, we created the issue event, this event has all the details related to that issue. With the context, it has information about the cloud instance where this event came from. So let's jump onto the challenge. Here we have a method called update status. What we want it to do is that whenever this issue inside a issue, a new comment is created, the status of that issue should automatically transition from to do to in progress status. And that is handled by update status. If you go into the manifest file, we already have it defined here using the Jira trigger command created function. It will look for the issue commented event, and it's going to be handled by update status method inside the product trigger file. So once we jump into that, right now it is doing return true. So let's comment out this line. And the task for you is going to be to, before defining the task, I'll explain what's happening in the code. we have something called, we are getting the issue key from the event. And from that, we are getting all the transitions of that particular issue. From those transitions, we are selecting the in progress status ID. And we have created this body data, which will pass on to the API call that we are going to make. The challenge here is the API call that we'll make to make this transition. You have to update that API endpoint here. As before, you can find the hint below, just below the task, which corresponds to the API documentation where you can find this particular API. This should take a couple of minutes. All right, let's look into the solution for this challenge. So the route for this API method, in this case, is going to be REST API /3/issue and passing on the issue key, which we got it from the event here, /transitions. And this API call supports post method. Let's save this. Also, please keep in mind that when you deploy the code and immediately if you try to refresh the app in your browser, it might sometimes return an error. The reason being, it takes a little bit of time because the code is getting bundled and then being deployed in the cloud. So it takes some time to load it. So give it a few seconds and then the app should work fine. So now our code is updated. Let's refresh our instance. Here we have the sample issue. Let's try to create a comment here. This is a sample comment. Let's save it. And if we go back to the board and refresh this page, you will see the issue has been transitioned to in progress status. And we can also confirm it from our logs that this method was invoked. Let's try to do another one here. Go through hands-on exercise. This is currently in progress. Save that. Let's refresh the instance. And works. Last hands-on in this session is about the storage. Purge allows apps to be able to store, retrieve, and delete data from storage in Atlassian's cloud using two different APIs. First is the force storage API. If you have worked with a key value database like Redis, this will feel familiar. Force storage lets your app to store data for specific Jira or Confluence styles. To use this API, you will first need to add storage app scope in your manifest file. Then you can make API calls as follows. You can do CRUD operations, which is create, read, update, and delete. You can do create or update using storage.set method. You can read data using storage.get and storage.query method. And you can delete data using storage.delete method. Another way of storing data is entity properties. These are also key value stores, but this lets you store to Jira entities like issues, comments, projects, etc. This comes with its own set of APIs to create, read, update, and delete data. We can go through our documentation to find that out. In this exercise, we'll work with 4 storage APIs. With both these options, one might have to think which option to go for a specific use case. If the data you want to store is related to an already available entity, entity properties is a better fit. If the data is not at all related to an entity, forced storage might be a better fit. Although this is not a strict rule, as forced storage is a simple key value store, and you can store entity data too. It's just a matter of architecture choice of keeping the data where it should belong. All right, let's jump into the code. For this, we'll go back to the UIN storage.jsx file. And in the instance, on the sidebar, we have the dev day 23 demos. We'll take a look at this to-do app that we have here. So what we have here is a table which has few of the values of name and status, name of the task and the status. And we have a couple of values here. So let's try to look into the code, what's happening here. So let's start off with this line. Here we have a macro app, and inside that there's a smaller app which we are calling to-do app is getting rendered. And to-do app is consuming some data which we have called to-do data. So let's look at what's inside this to-do data. To-do data is we are getting it using a method called fetch store data, and we are storing it inside this to-do data using the use state hook that we talked about earlier. Let's take a look at this fetch store data method function. So in this function, first we are creating some of these values. So we have the storage.set method. The first value is what we call key, and the second is value is a JSON object. After that, once we have created all the sample data, we are trying to get all of that data using storage.query method, and we are storing it inside the data constant. And then we are returning this data, and it's getting passed on here. And the to-do app that we looked at before is the table. It has a head, couple of rows, and we have defined the columns. So this is pretty static right now. The challenge for this exercise, you can look for challenge 3, and you will come across here, which is about the storage API. And the task is, here we have some value, some of the data points with the key to do 1, to do 2, there's the book 1. Now we want to filter this out to only render data which of to do types. This means the values where the key starts with to do. Just like before, you have the link from the documentation on how to do this, and whatever answer that you come up with, you have to update here in this line for the constant data. This should take a couple of minutes for you. All right, let's look into the solutions. So if you got this answer, congratulations, you got this right. What we are doing here is we are using the storage query method and this another method that we can chain called .where, and we are going to define what we are looking for, in this case key, and there's a special helper called starts with. And starts with, what it will do is whatever value we pass on to, it will look into the key and going to match that it starts with to do and get all the results using get many method. So once you have made the change, save it, and the force tunneling will automatically bundle the code. So let's refresh the app here. And there you go. Now instead of the to-do and the book, you see all the to-do apps only, to-do tasks only. Although Forge apps are serverless, it's still possible to debug them. You can do that by adding --debug option to Forge tunnel command. We provide you all the tools necessary to manage your apps, monitor their performance, check the logs, and ability to distribute your app. All this is possible from the developer console at developer.atlassian.com. Lastly, we have tons of tutorials, guides, and sample apps in our Forge docs that we highly encourage you to explore. So let me quickly walk you through the tutorials and the guides. And maybe suggest a couple of them that you might be interested to check it out. One is the workflow validator. You might want to check this out as your next challenge. And this one builds upon the trigger challenge that we did. And the interesting one is if you want to integrate your app with a third-party API, we have this create a Giphy app using UIKit. Although this is based on the Confluence app, based on Confluence, but the way it works is similar to how it would work in Jira. This brings us to an end to this workshop. We hope that you gained valuable knowledge and are leaving equipped with the skills to fully leverage the power of Forge in your projects. We look forward to seeing what you build.